Today, we're diving into an epic showdown between two legends of the early home computing era. First up, Apple IIe, released in 1983 as an enhanced version of the original Apple II, one of the godfathers of home computing. And his competitor, the Commodore 64, launched in 1982 and renowned for its cutting-edge graphics and sound. We're comparing some of the most popular games that start with the letter A and to see how these classics stack up. So let's get started. Boom! First up, we have Apple Cider Spider, released in 1983 by Sierra Online. Right away, you can see the difference in the visuals. The Apple II version has a simpler, more subdued color scheme, which gives it a unique charm. But watch as we shift to the Commodore 64, the colors here really pop, and the animation is noticeably smoother overall. When it comes to sound, the Apple IIe uses basic beeps, while the C64 richer audio adds more atmosphere to the gameplay. But here's something interesting. I actually found the Apple IIe version easier to control, and I managed to get further along than I did on the Commodore 64. This is my first time ever playing Apple Cider Spider on either system, so it was a fun discovery. What about you? Did you ever play Apple Cider Spider back in the day? If so, which version was your favorite? Let me know in the comments.
If you like these kind of videos, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Next up is Arcticfox, a 3D tank shooter released in 1986 by Electronic Arts. Set in the year 2005, players pilot the Arcticfox tank to defend Antarctica from an alien invasion. A pretty intense storyline for its time. The game was known for its innovative 3D wireframe graphics, which were impressive back then. On the Apple IIe, the graphics are effective, though the frame rate can be a bit choppy. Over on the Commodore 64, you'll notice smoother frames and more detailed visuals, making the gameplay feel more refined. It's interesting to think of Arcticfox as one of the pioneers of 3D vehicle simulation, paving the way for future games. Did you ever play Arcticfox on either of these systems? Let me know in the comments which version you think handles it better.
Oh, and if you're a fan of fast-paced arcade action, just wait until we hit Axis Assassin.
Next up is Arkanoid, the iconic arcade breakout game developed by Taito and brought to home computers in the late 80s. This game challenges your reflexes as you control a paddle to keep the ball in play and smash through rows of bricks. On the Apple IIe, the graphics are clean and simple, just keeps the focus on the gameplay, but the real challenge here, the controls. The joystick was incredibly sensitive, making it tough to move the paddle with accuracy. It's often felt like the paddle would zip across the screen without even the slightest touch. Now switch over to the Commodore 64 and you'll notice not only more vibrant colors, but also smoother control that gives you a bit more precision. And the C64 richer audio also ramps up the excitement, especially as you try to catch those fast-moving power-ups. So did you play Arkanoid at home? And if so, how were the controls on your system? Let me know in the comments which version you think nailed the arcade feel. Next up, we have Ardy the Aardvark, an action game from 1983 inspired by the arcade classic Anteater. And the goal is to guide Ardy through the tunnels using his tongue to collect dots and avoid enemies, including that rather persistent spider. And on the Apple IIe, the visuals are simple, making it easy to track his tongue through the maze. And you switch over to the C64 and you notice same stuff, more detailed color, of course, right? And it was just a little bit more engaging and visually on the C64. Sound-wise, the Apple IIe keeps it straightforward, the basic beeps, and of course the Commodore 64 had more audio effects because the SID chip just blew away anything the Apple had. Now, here's where things got challenging. The controls. On both systems, I found it frustrating moving downward, side to side. It wouldn't always respond the way I want it, which often left me missing dots or in a dangerous spot when the spider's closing in. And speaking of the spider, It's relentless, and once it reaches you, there's no escape. I couldn't figure out how to handle it. So if anyone has any tips, feel free to share them in the comments. Did you play Ardy the Aardvark back in the day? If so, let me know. If you have any tricks for handling that spider, I'd love it. Let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have Alf, the first adventure, released in 1987 and based on the iconic 80s sitcom. The game storyline is as cheesy as it gets. Alf runs around collecting pizzas and spaceship parts while dodging the dog catcher and Willie. It's a bit ridiculous, but honestly, that fits right in with the tone of this show. And on the Apple IIe, the graphics are pretty basic. The Alf's head looks more like a pig than an alien, and the pizza looks like fireworks when you grab them, which adds to the game's quirky charm. Over on the Commodore 64, the colors are brighter, and Alf actually looks more like himself. The SID chip adds a more dynamic sound, giving the C64 a bit more atmosphere. Gameplay wise, catching the cats was tricky. Willie kept catching me, and every time I had to let all the cats go back out of the garage. And the dog catcher was relentless too, and running into the trash can would knock you out for a second. And overall, it was a cheesy experience that feels right at home with the Alf brand. Were you an Alf fan back in the day? Let me know in the comments which version you think brings out the 80s nostalgia best. Next, we're diving into Axe's Assassin, one of my favorites from this lineup. Released in 1983, this fast-paced shooter has you navigating a spider web-like grid, blasting enemies as you go. It reminds me a lot of Tempest, and it's just as intense. On the Apple IIe, the colors really stand out against the black background, giving it a clean, bold look that's easy on the eyes. I think it looks a lot better than the Commodore 64 version, actually, if you look at it side by side. The colors are more vibrant on the Apple IIe than they are on the Commodore 64. Now, sound-wise, of course, the Apple keeps it simple with basic beeps, while the Commodore 64 amps it up with the richer audio effects and makes each shot and explosion feel a bit more dynamic. Now, as much as I enjoyed the look of the Apple IIe version, the controls were a bit of a struggle for me, like pretty much all of the Apple ones. It's harder to navigate the grid precisely, which made it tough to stay on top of the action. The C64's smoother control response gives it a slight edge here, especially those chaotic levels later on, and I could get much farther on the Commodore 64 just because I can control much better. And did you ever play Axe's Assassin back in the day? Let me know which version brings out the arcade energy in you. Next, we're exploring Alcazar the Forgotten Fortress, an action-adventure game released by Activision in 1985. In this game, you navigate a sprawling fortress, searching for treasures while taking down enemies along the way. It's a mix of exploration and combat that keeps you on your toes. On the Apple IIe, the graphics are simple but effective, laying out each room of the fortress with enough detail to keep you engaged. Over on the Commodore 64, the visuals get a little boost with added color, smoother transition that gives the fortress a more immersive feel. Sound-wise, the Apple IIe keeps it basic, while the C64 adds a bit more atmosphere with richer audio that complements the gameplay. Now, here's where things got tricky, the controls. On the Apple IIe, my character kept pulling to the side, almost like a car out of alignment. I was constantly adjusting, which made moving and shooting a challenge. The Commodore 64 version had smoother controls, making it easier to focus on the gameplay rather than constantly trying to correct where I stood. Have you ever tried Alcazar the Forgotten Fortress? Let me know in the comments which version you think captures that adventurous feel the best. Boom. That wraps up today's side-by-side comparison of classic games on the Apple IIe and the Commodore 64. If you enjoyed this video, check out more in the series by clicking on the next video here, and let me know in the comments which game stood out for you.